Coming up on Why Should I Trust You? Why should MAHA trust MAGA and vice versa? They were strange bedfellows right from the jump. RFK Jr., the lifelong Kennedy Democrat, an anti-big business, organic food promoting environmentalist lawyer, once considered by President Obama to head the Environmental Protection Agency, joining forces with President Donald Trump, the big business, anti-environmentalist, McDonald's-loving billionaire-in-chief, to become his head of Health and Human Services, and to, quote, let Bobby go wild on health. So now we see what happens when MAGA meets MAHA. These two very different movements are suddenly one. But are they truly? We've heard it over and over again from so many people now, what an immense leap of faith it was for lifelong Democrats who adore RFK Jr. to vote for Donald Trump. On today's episode, were they right to trust? Can Trump and MAGA get RFK Jr.'s Make America Healthy Again agenda done? What if that means bigger government, more regulation, more rules, and less choice in your vending machine? Will MAGA supporters get what they want out of this? We'll ask Batya Ungar-Sargon, journalist, author, and vocal Trump supporter, whether the union of MAHA and MAGA is forged in iron or destined for breakup. Let's get started. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Brenda Adhikari.
I'm Tom Johnson.
I'm Maggie Bartlett.
I'm Dr. Mark.
Tom and I are two journalists. Maggie's a virologist. Dr. Mark is a doctor. We are back. Hey, Tom, we're doing things a little differently this week, huh?
Yeah, we're really breaking the mold. Our listeners, I think by now sort of get that we're focusing on Americans' mistrust in public health and science right now and how we got here and where we're hurtling towards. In today, we're going to do things a little differently. We're going to dip our toe a tiny bit into politics, into policy, and sort of track this relationship between MAGA and MAHA and really ask, do these two critical groups, these two movements, do they actually trust each other? Because they are married now, or at least they got married right before the election.
That's right.
But they're two powerful social movements, and it's a strange, unexpected bond. And we're really trying to ask the question, like, are they going to get things done together? So we talked to a lot of MAHA faithful. As you mentioned, Brenda, a lot of them are Democrats who said that they pulled a lever for Trump.
Yep.
That was a real leap of faith. They did it because they love RFK. They are ready for big changes. He is promising to deliver those changes, everything on the environment, questioning vaccine safety, this huge focus on chronic health, transparency. But a few days ago, Brenda, you had this really great conversation, and that got us thinking about this episode.
Yeah. It was funny, Tom. I was talking to not a MAHA person. And look, as you know, I'm pretty plugged into a lot of different MAHA moms and just MAHA supporters. But this time I was talking to a MAGA supporter. I was talking to Batya Ungar-Sargon, who's going to be the guest on our podcast today. I'd reached out to Batya just to float the idea of being a guest on our show. And we were chatting about a bunch of different things. And she had this take that really kind of blew my mind, if I'm being honest. She basically said she thinks MAHA under Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is not good for MAGA. And Batya's a MAGA supporter. I mean, she thinks what RFK Jr. says is out of step with the priorities of most working class Americans. So look, we're going to speak with Batya in a moment. But, on the show, we talk a lot about RFK Jr. We talk a lot about the Make America Healthy Again movement and what it all means for Americans from, a science perspective, a public health perspective, a medical perspective. But we haven't really stopped to acknowledge like you said, Tom, the political reality. Look, it's a rich topic. We were thinking, Tom, you had sent me this soundbite of Donald Trump, who was at the swearing in of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., obviously, to be his Health and Human Services Secretary. This happened a couple of weeks ago. This is only about a minute or so long. So let's play this piece of sound from Donald Trump.
Bobby has devoted much of his life to serving his fellow Americans in his campaign for president, and he was a very tough competitor. I did not like it at all. I said, let's get him on my side. But in his campaign for president in 2024, Bobby brought together a coalition of supporters across party lines, and he really worked very hard, and he had tremendous support, unbelievable support. And I think a lot of that support came my way when we decided to do a little merger. And It was really great. Perhaps most importantly, though, Bobby created a nationwide movement made up of millions and millions of mothers and fathers and young people and concerned citizens of every background who want to end and this horrible chronic disease crisis that exists in America. After years in which our public health system has squandered the trust of our citizens, and they really have. They don't trust us. They don't trust anybody, frankly. They've gone through hell. There's no better person to lead our campaign of historic reforms and restore faith in American health care.
Yeah. So look, Mark, I mean, in that soundbite, Trump sounds pretty excited about Bobby Kennedy and MAHA, but the facts are that this is a president who is pro-business, pro-big oil, anti-regulation, pro-fast food. He's not a big lover of environmental advocacy. It's kind of hard to square all these things with MAHA.
Yeah. I mean, he's not the typical like picture of health kind of, guy. I mean, he is McDonald's loving. And for his part, though, he did say, put his money where his mouth is, and he did sign a MAHA executive order back on February 13th, and it established the MAHA Commission. I mean, if you look at what that looks like, I mean, that is a hold nothing back kind of dream team of public agencies and government leaders. I mean, I don't know if I've seen that kind of it's a meeting of the minds. It's the heads of the Department of Agriculture, HUD, Education, the administrator of the EPA, and on and on. It's interesting that for a movement that's supposedly grounded in the everyday American people and, the public, there's not anybody there who is from the public at that table. It's a top-down approach. And, I'm curious about how that sits when we hear from so many libertarians and MAHA people that want less government telling them what to do. And now for the MAHA Commission, I mean, it's like 15 people,
right?
All big government, going to dictate what's ahead.
Yeah. And Mark, let's actually define for people. I know it's crazy because we say MAHA so much on the show, but tell us a little bit about what MAHA is, what it stands for, what the movement even is.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, everybody's heard of it, but what is it? It stands for Make America Healthy Again, obviously a play on MAGA. And boy, did that work. I mean, that worked big time in the election. And in very broad strokes, the movement, it's about wellness culture and getting well, but by dodging some big things, dodging big pharma, moving around big food, and certainly not relying on big vaccines. And really people ask, would MAHA be what it is today without COVID? I mean, that's the thing that we cannot escape. Probably not. I mean, some would say certainly not. COVID was the turning point that made MAHA a movement. We have a call to action now. It's no longer just an idea. After COVID and the restrictions that came down and the mandates and that backlash, it is now a movement with force. And obviously the captain of that MAHA movement, RFK Jr., I mean, he crafted a message that resonates with people from all walks of life, which many would say is the key to winning the election. He says he wants to lead the charge to combat chronic disease, and we've heard it, cleaner water, cleaner food. Basically, he's going to hold the guiding light to a healthier future. And he's made it clear he's going to tackle and solve America's chronic disease crisis, and once and for all. Interestingly, because of some of the COVID downstream effects, it's also about this idea of medical freedom. That doesn't have a 4-letter word yet, but brace yourself, it may come. But the idea that you and only you decide what's best for you and your family. The government should have no role in your health decisions. That's very empowering for a lot of the MAHA movement. They want to reduce the amount of medicines that we take. And the rhetoric is very skeptical of vaccines. And their language has shifted to not being about denying people access to vaccines, but just they want a full-on relitigating of vaccine safety. Let's start over and look again. We left too many things unturned. It's about lowering the rates of chronic diseases and ending industry influence over our government health agencies. And then there's another arm of it where it's people who, may be interested in learning more about psychedelics, people going back to the ivermectin discussion, raw milk, hyperbaric oxygen. Look, I mean, I'm a dermatologist. They talk about sunlight being a magical cure. And, let's not forget, good old fashioned exercise. I mean, if we had a MAHA convention, it would be interesting to see who would show up there. I mean, You'd have the crunchy natural food movement. You'd have people suffering from chronic diseases that have, lost their way in the mainstream medicine world. You'd have social media influencers. You'd have farmers, who've been doing this for a long time. I mean, you'd have, entrepreneurs who are running psychedelic shops, and then you'd have, the anti-vaxxers. I mean, it's a large group of people, and they're out there.
Right.
I think Brenda would go too.
Yeah. It's a bigger tent. I mean, honestly, there are some things that they say that on the food stuff, on some of these things, I find the message quite compelling. But I think, does all of this align with MAGA? I mean, look, we all know what MAGA is, but I just took a look at their 2024 platform, what Trump ran on this time around, and it was all centered around the forgotten men and women of America. I'm literally reading from donaldjtrump.com right now. And it says, it talks about wanting to fix unfair trade deals and inflation and crime and overrun border, global chaos and instability, men and women's sports. I mean, we lived through it all. I don't have to go into all of it, but nowhere in there does it mention health. Now, he changed his tune after meeting Bobby Kennedy in August of last year, but still, I think it was sometime in November, 2 weeks after the election, that Trump nominates RFK Jr. to be his HHS secretary. And then I think at that point, at least message-wise, branding-wise, it was suddenly MAGA, it was MAGA, it was MAHA, it was all that together. But I still can't shake this feeling that I'm at a wedding and I'm not sure this marriage stands a chance of working out, but they've taken their vows. We're almost at the cocktail hour. So I guess we're doing this. I can't wait for the reception.
Are we the reception?
I just love a good party.
We're living the reception.
Yeah. So Tom, listen, how did we get to this moment? Take us through this romance of MAHA and MAGA.
Yeah. Okay. So start by closing your eyes and just envision MAHA before MAHA. Think of the MAHA of your youth. This is this anti-vaccine, anti-mainstream medicine, pharma skeptical community. I picture hemp and healing crystals and herbal supplements and ex-hippies sitting on beanbag chairs. I don't know what you picture, but
am I allowed to open my eyes yet?
Yeah, you can open your eyes now, Mark.
Oh, okay.
But from the late 70s to the early 2000s, the roots of MAHA were far left. This is Berkeley, California. They had little clout. They didn't have a message. They were kind of loosely associated, just no funding, no organization. A lot of believers, but just kind of going nowhere. And it's interesting, this author, Matt Hongoltz-Hetling, in his book, Journey to the Fringes of American Medicine, and he actually pinpoints what he thinks is the exact conference, the exact moment where this changes for them. And he's looking at the Health Freedom Expo in Los Angeles in 2005. This is an event where there's vendors selling alternative medicines and supplements. And, things were sort of limping along. And all of a sudden at that expo, there is sort of a merging of libertarianism with this alt health left movement. So in short, the new agey far left crew starts to merge with libertarians, and they start to adopt a new banner, which is, instead of new age healing, it all becomes about medical freedom. They have a rebrand, and they merge with libertarians, and now it's all about liberty. It's not about, we have an alternative for you. This is about, I get to do with me and my family what I think is right for us. Mark, do you want to talk a little bit more about just what we can discern about medical freedom, what that's all about? I'm guessing viewers or listeners have heard about it, but maybe, not so much.
Heard it, and it is what it sounds like. I mean, in one way, it's not that complicated, but for the most part, and it's a spectrum, so not everyone who ascribes to the medical freedom movement necessarily believes everything that MAHA's doing, but the core principles are, leave me alone, let me do what I want with my body and my kids' bodies, and let me make something very clear. The medical freedom movement is saying that the government or big pharma is the last place they're going to turn to for advice when it comes to their health. It's a movement that's often opposed to scientific consensus and mainstream medical practices, which is where we get into a little bit of a riff when it comes down to actually making medical decisions that are going to save somebody's life. But, the movement started with a turn to alternative medicines. I mean, think health food store, alternative medicine clinics, and it was mostly operating in the background, again, until COVID went and changed the narrative. I mean, when COVID vaccine mandates and mask policies became central issues, the conversation shifted and did so dramatically, and it sparked a broader backlash. because people felt like they were being imposed on, and it wasn't against just their like medical beliefs. It was almost something even more. It was their identity. It was un-American to fight them on this, and that really catapulted the medical freedom movement into the national spotlight and made it a political force. And this is happening perhaps in places across the country. I mean, we already talked about the idea that vaccine rates are dropping, but according to the American Academy of Pediatrics, at least 21 states have introduced bills this year that would broaden the reasons why parents can exempt kids from getting vaccines, even if there isn't a medical need, right? It's things like, they may even require doctors to provide more information on the risks of vaccines that's not, based in evidence, or that perhaps they need to limit the state's health department authority from adding new immunization requirements and maybe put those decisions in the hands of legislators. I mean, it's a little confusing because this is the stuff of leave everybody alone, but there is a active push to get this narrative out there.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I think at the same time when this movement was gaining ground, mainstream medicine and health was kind of shooting itself in the foot. We had chronic doctor shortages in rural America, and that made healthcare hard to access and left people resentful. Medical costs were skyrocketing. Health insurance was getting more and more convoluted and powerful. And then you have the opioid epidemic that was killing people in numerous
and making
neighborhoods.
It even more difficult to trust pharmaceutical companies.
Yes, absolutely. And when people's faith in that mainstream health community was dropping, and I totally get that. I'm, from the third largest city in Nebraska, which isn't that big, Grand Island. And access to specialized care just wasn't available. So you would drive hours to Omaha for that specialized care, sometimes for a 5-minute consultation and drive all the way back. And you may or may not get guidance depending on what the condition was. I went with my mom for testing for multiple sclerosis. So we were up and down a lot to see the specialist there. And it was exhausting. And then dealing with insurance and if you can afford to even go that distance, if you can take off work. And so you end up finding out that, someone in town has something that is too good to be true solution, and it's more accessible. So you're willing to try that out of really just hope and desperation that you're not getting answers the traditional way. And I think that spoke to probably a lot of people.
Oh, for sure.
A new way of looking at health. I mean, if you think about all of the healthcare discussions before, we were so critical of how expensive healthcare was. That's what everybody talked about.
Yeah.
It's too expensive. You can't access it. Now, suddenly, we're not even talking about the cost. We don't care how expensive it is. We just think it's terrible. We don't even want it. We want something else.
The big conversation about health has been Obamacare or tear down Obamacare. And, sort of the joke has been that, Trump's never actually delivered an alternative plan, and even that was coming up at the debate again. He said he had the framework of a plan. Suddenly, that is shifting, that ground is shifting under everyone's feet right before the election. And it, we'll get to it in a moment, that Trump sees that. He sees that movement and grabs it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really rich. There's a lot of frustration at health. It is not, like you said, I think that's absolutely right. It's not just this kind of single tentpole Obamacare issue. And like you guys have been saying, trust was breaking down well before we hit the pandemic, obviously, which was this galvanizing event. And all the backlash, Mark, that you were talking about lockdowns and closed businesses and schools, all of this is feeding into this growing movement, this kind of new burgeoning movement, giving it strength. You've got this just anti-establishment, anti-expertise, anti-pharma message. It really starts to resonate, not just with kind of crunchy moms and dads and libertarians, but now with a much wider swath of Americans. I mean, you're starting now to see Republicans more skeptical of vaccinations, something that this group has traditionally been kind of decently supportive of. In fact, one study from Gallup just from last summer shows that Republicans who think childhood vaccinations are extremely important It went from 62% of Republicans thinking childhood vaccinations are extremely important from about 20 years ago. Then it started to slowly erode to about 50% right before the pandemic. And then wham, after the pandemic, it just collapsed to about 26%. So now only about a quarter of Republicans think that childhood vaccinations are extremely important.
Which is like the bedrock of our defense against infectious disease in this country and has been for decades and decades and decades.
Right.
Yeah.
But interestingly, that same poll, Brenda, it showed that Democrats don't really have that drop. So it shows how vaccines really, it's a proxy for your political party.
It is a polarizing issue. I mean, when you break the numbers down a little bit, there is erosion in like different parts of it. If you talk about like specifically the MMR vaccine or whatever, but you're absolutely right, Mark, that for the most part, this is a partisan divide. And I think Trump probably noticed that as well. And the mandates during COVID made MAGA more skeptical of public health, and suddenly public health becomes the enemy. And MAHA folks were kind of already there. And then you have this sort of explosion, particularly during the pandemic, of, the supplements and the wellness industry. And now you've got, your social media feed with pro athletes and Hollywood actors and influencers spreading the message. And it seems like this is just a crazy, disparate coalition, but uniting it all is Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Yeah. I mean, he's on the stage and he is front and center. I mean, if you look everywhere, because he's so interesting. I mean, he's tan, he's fit, and he's really
ripped.
wants to make everybody healthy. I mean, his cousin Carolyn Kennedy, I mean, she's rallying against his nomination, and she also realizes why he is so skillful in a way. I mean, she says he has always been charismatic, able to attract others through the strength of his personality and willingness to take risks and break the rules. I mean, again, he is a challenger of the status quo. And if you are marginalized or feel that the system isn't working for you, this is a guy to latch onto. I mean, anybody who's heard him speak, I mean, he has this, the voice. He even says that voice issue that he has, a light bulb went off for him because he feels that when he was looking into the flu vaccines, he realized that exact diagnosis was in the list of side effects. So now he is now injured and almost a martyr for this cause. I mean, he believes, pesticides, we've heard it all, pesticides, dyes, seed oil, microplastics, all of that stuff. It's all leaving us chronically ill, and we need better food, and we need to end the corporate capture of government.
I think the radical transparency too is a huge theme that a lot of people are gravitating to. He's going to go into HHS. He's there now. He's going to open up the windows, throw up the shades, open the doors, and let the American public see what all this data, see what all this research is that they believe has been held back. And so Kennedy runs for president as an independent. He's got a following, but it's small. He was polling around 7% in August when he finally decides to pull the plug. And, it's kind of hard to imagine it now, but for a couple of weeks, there was not a huge speculation game as to who he was going to endorse, Harris or Trump, but it wasn't exactly clear. Trump had called him a radical left lunatic. He said that he was the dumbest member of the Kennedy clan. They had sort of a vicious, they kind of had a vicious back and forth.
That's so mean. I can't believe he said that.
Dumbest member. I mean, it's a good dig. Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy how some of that doesn't matter anymore. I mean, look at us. We are like super careful about what we say and want to make sure we don't get anything wrong. I mean, you could just say anything and still end up, being
I'd be so sad if you guys call me the dumbest member of our clan. Just know that, okay?
So they meet on the sidelines of the RNC. This is Trump and Kennedy. It was reported that RFK reached out to the Harris camp too. He was looking for a role in a future administration in exchange for his endorsement. The Harris meeting never happens. And it's interesting. I saw this, the DNC told CNN, quote, "No one has any intention of negotiating with a MAGA-funded fringe candidate who has sought out a job with Donald Trump in exchange for an endorsement." And then all of a sudden the news breaks that RFK has endorsed Trump. There's a kind of now in the history of MAHA, this famous Arizona event where Trump and RFK appear together and the crowd goes wild. And this is where RFK says, "Do you want a president that's going to make America healthy again?" And the crowd obviously goes nuts. And in that moment, the movement now has a mantra, make America healthy again, the MAHA label we've talked about, and MAHA and MAGA are bonded. Interestingly, a couple days later, the senior members of Kennedy's campaign team, they launch a Make America Healthy Again super PAC, and it's all geared at getting Trump elected. On the PAC's website, the very first sentence you read says that MAHA, quote, channels the unwavering energy of the health freedom movement into a powerful political force for change. So MAHA absorbs medical freedom and itself is absorbed by MAGA. Everybody got that?
Oh my
No,
goodness.
say that again.
It's like a Russian nesting doll.
Yeah.
I need to take notes.
I know
Yeah.
there's going to be a test. So all of this is good for Trump's reelection, but is MAGA truly about making America healthy again?
Unclear. I mean, you guys remember Michelle Obama's like "Let's Move" campaign,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
and that I actually didn't realize it was a law. It it got signed into law. This combat childhood obesity, improve the nutrition in school lunches, um, became legislation, and the right freaked out.
Right.
And that's the same right that's MAGA today. There was "Get your damn hands off my fries, lady." That was from Glenn Beck. Everybody was talking about food police and this nanny state. Sean Hannity asked, "Does every
Right.
American family need a dietitian appointed by the government to tell them this food's going to make you fat?" So, they just ripped into Michelle Obama. And actually, one of the first things Trump does when he comes into office in 2016 is he rolls back the restrictions on the nutritional content of school provided lunches. So, is MAGA really going to go all in on making lunches healthier now? And that's like small fry stuff.
Yeah, I mean,
what about all the bigger, bolder MAHA goals? Like, are they going to do that?
so flash forward to today, and a lot of MAHA took note that these appointments are happening. RFK, everybody watched the hearing, but I can guarantee you, I don't even know if it was televised, but there was the hearing for the Department of Agriculture. And nobody knows the name, but Trump put Brooke Rollins atop this department. And, it's not something that anybody ever talked about. And, she seems to be a pretty pro-business and is a deregulation conservative. And when she was confirmed, the Farm Bureau put out a statement saying the farm and ranch families are looking for a champion and a voice as they continue to face economic headwinds, right? So they're really focusing on, the price. How do you run a farm? The margins are low, labor challenges, and real uncertainty over what's going to happen, what's happening in Washington, how that's going to impact, rural farmers. I mean, this doesn't sound like a green light to go wild on new regulations on food producers. I mean,
Yeah.
in her opening remarks to the Department of Agriculture earlier this month, I mean, she alludes, it's like a little foreshadowing, like I hear something, she says, we will work to ensure that Make America Great Again and Make America Healthy Again exist, not in opposition to one another. So she knows there's some tension there, but as complements in a common mission for our country. But then the closing punchline is, in that conversation, I will always defend American ag at the table. So I don't want to read too much into this statement, but if there's a tie, it sounds like she's leading on the side of, big food, farmers, American ag.
Right.
So finally, there's like the other part of MAHA, which is like, we need clean air, we need clean water.
Right.
RFK is like Genesis, right? This is about the environment affects health. It's all one thing. And that, of course, falls under the EPA. So it's worth noting how Team Trump is staffing up the EPA. And over there, it's sort of out of the limelight. According to the New York Times, they said, quote, President Trump is stocking the EPA with officials who have served as lawyers and lobbyists for the oil and chemical industries, many of whom worked in his first administration to weaken climate and pollution protections. So, again, is MAGA really on board with MAHA's goals of prioritizing health in the environment?
Yeah. No, I think It'll be really interesting, actually, to talk with Batya because, we're noticing that there could be these potential spots of tension between the two movements. And she's got a really interesting take on that. And look, she is supportive of Donald Trump, like we'd said. And I think our goal in speaking with her today is less to get into the whole MAGA agenda and litigate it, because I think some of us feel pretty differently than she does. We disagree with her about some of that stuff. But are inviting her on because we want to do a little more listening. We want to really understand her perspective. And she has a take that we thought was really interesting and worthwhile to listen to. And look, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll introduce you guys to Batya Ungar-Sargon. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back, everyone. We want to bring in our guest. Joining us now is Batya Ungar-Sargon, a columnist at the Free Press, a frequent contributor to Fox News, News Nation, and Sky News. Her work has been published in the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, and New York Times. And Batya is the author of Second Class: How the Elites Betrayed America's Working Men and Women. She's been a vocal supporter of President Trump and the MAGA platform. And she's also worked with one of our favorite partners, Braver Angels, which brings folks who are Republicans and Democrats and people of all ideological stripes together to engage in civil and meaningful dialogue aimed at depolarization. We want to welcome Batya to Why Should I Trust You?
Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm a little intimidated by the credentials at play here, but I'm totally honored to be here. And I really do hope you'll ask me anything you want to know. I'm sure you guys have a lot of people who really, really, really support what President Trump is doing. I really, really, really support it. And I'm really, really so grateful anytime I have the opportunity to talk to people who don't about that, who might be open to hearing how somebody sees things a little bit differently. So all of which is to say thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here and an honor to be in this conversation with you and your audience.
And we want to do a shout out for your book, Second Class. I think it's in the background there too, but for everybody who's listening, Second Class: How the Elites Betrayed America's Working Men and Women. And that was quite a project with you traveling the country, talking to the working class and finding a lot of interesting things. So you're kind of the perfect person for us to talk to help us kind of navigate, what's going down here. Because we do talk to a lot of MAGA supporters. We talk to a lot of MAHA people who took a leap of faith in voting for Trump, kind of like their first foray out of the Democratic Party. And so your help here is, I think, going to be great. I'll just kick it off with one first kind of question. I heard you mentioning just a great piece, and we all kind of kicked it around here. And this was in the Free Press. And it was written by Evan Barker, and it was titled "When Maha Forgets the Working Class." And she was a longtime Democratic fundraiser, worker, volunteer. And this past fall, she voted for Trump because she says a policy, but also there's a culture of attitudes and a fundamental lack of understanding by elites about the working class in this country. In her piece, she writes, "Some of Maha champions remind me of the people who pushed me away from the modern Democratic Party by refusing to acknowledge the daily struggles of ordinary Americans." So she's saying some of the folks championing Maha, Make America Healthy Again, don't get the struggles of the working class. Can you help us unpack that? What are you hearing in that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a fundamental reason Donald Trump won was dignity for working class people. In many, many, many ways, they had felt and really were actually had their opportunities to pursue the American dream radically reduced over the last 50 years. And increasingly, when they would speak up and complain about it, elites in the Democratic Party or liberals or leftists would sneer at them or smear them. There are many examples of this. The reason I bring this up is because something that I think is unbelievably important for both Republicans and Democrats to understand right now is that Donald Trump won because he flipped a lot of people who were Democrats 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and 40 years ago. Those people voted for him because they saw in him not an extremist, but a moderate, indeed a throwback to the Democratic Party in its 90s era version or even in the New Deal version. And we can talk about that if you guys want. But those people are gettable for either party. Either party that wakes up and says, we're going to treat you with dignity and respect, those people are gettable. And it's so simple. There's so much panic happening right now in the Democratic Party. How do we, get back? How do we win? What messaging should we? It's very, very simple. Listen to your voters. Love the American people. They are very worthy of your love and respect. Allow them to tell you what they want. That's actually what Donald Trump did. He started going to CPAC and listened to which lines got the most applause. And instead of saying these people are deplorables, he said, maybe there's something here. Maybe the American people deserve leadership that responds to what they want. So let's talk about Evan's piece. Evan Barker is a remarkable woman. She has a chronic illness and has overcome so much. She raised about $50 million for the Democrats and finally just couldn't take the elitism anymore of the party and, wrote her big swan song, exiting the party. She, from the DNC, actually, she wrote it for me at Newsweek. And she was writing this piece because she started to see the same kind of elitism infecting the MAHA discourse. Now, I don't think the whole MAHA movement is elitist. The opposite. Obviously, poor people, working class people bear the brunt of everything bad gets much, much worse as you go downstream. My father's a neurologist and he talks about this all the time. He can have two patients come in with the exact same x-rays. And one of them is working class and was sexually abused as a child. And the other is upper middle class and grew up in a very happy family. The working class abuse survivor will have unbelievable chronic pain with the same x-ray as an upper middle class person who can afford massages and therapies and whatnot, who will barely feel it. So much of this is connected, and the downstreaming of all of the crap in our cheap food and all of the crap in, our whatever medications and so forth, of course, that is borne disproportionately by the working class. But a lot of the kind of crunchy, organic, conspiracy-oriented solutions are very geared towards people with time on their hands.
Batya, when you and I chatted, you had a really interesting take on Robert F. Kennedy. And I want to ask you about him because I think you have some concerns about whether he really is the right guy to kind of for the working class, for MAGA supporters.
Yeah, I want to start by saying what Donald Trump did by bringing RFK Jr. into his cabinet, the same thing he did bringing Tulsi Gabbard into his cabinet or Lori Chavez DeRemer. Like, this is the most ideologically diverse American cabinet possibly ever. These people are all, Lori DeRemer is a conservative, but RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard are liberals. They're not conservatives and they're not Republicans. That is a very cool thing to do. And I think Donald Trump was trying to signal to the electorate, I'm going to be the president for everybody. And I truly admire that. And as somebody who identifies as a leftist populist, like a leftist who supports MAGA, that was for me, right? That was for me. But
I think, though, that a lot of that, the appointees like that, it's not the variation in ideology that gives a lot of people concern. It's for example, qualifications, right? So like, what are the qualifications that RFK Jr. may have to do this job? Right.
So we could spend a lot of time about, I personally think that the qualified class got us into a lot of the messes that we're now trying to claw our way out of. And so I think that was actually a big plus for a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump, certainly was for me. But when it comes to RFK Jr. specifically, I really wish he had gone in a different direction. And the reason for that is because this is a person who started out life with unbelievable privilege, limitless privilege, money, the name recognition. He could have done anything with that platform. And what he chose to do with it was to dupe poor people effectively. And I have a real problem with that, and I think that it infects the way that he sees things. Poor people are unhealthy because they're poor. Working class people are overweight because they do not have time to eat healthy and exercise because they're working 3 jobs to feed their kids. And because RFK Jr. does not know anyone like that, because he lives in this rich bubble, he effectively only knows people who have rich people problems. And, those problems are real. His phrase that he has, healthy people have 1,000 dreams, sick people only have one. It's so true. And of course, I'm sure we all in the privileged cast know people who suffer from chronic illness or from problems and are upper middle class. And my heart goes out to them. Seriously, it's sad. But there are actual, real, deep-seated systemic problems that are infecting millions and millions of Americans, and they are not autism that they got from a vaccine. And he is hoodwinking people whose lives are already unbearably difficult. I mean, can you imagine being poor or working class and having a child with extreme autism and being a single mom and having to feed that kid and keep a roof over their head? And maybe you have 3 other kids who you have to feed and get to school and give a normal life to. And you have a very autistic child who's sometimes violent, who's Can you imagine how difficult that person's life is? And here you have a rich millionaire with the name Kennedy coming along and saying, oh, someone did this to you because you took the vaccine. It's disgusting. It's disgusting.
You called it class
really,
warfare too. I mean, and
yeah.
I heard you say that, which is a
Absolutely.
really interesting term. Sorry, Maggie, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say I really appreciated your passion on this topic because I think it's something that often gets obfuscated, right? So autism is a serious condition that children suffer, and ultimately, by diverting our attention to something that's been debunked, we're not giving solutions to people. We're not putting forward the research to help with new therapeutic interventions. And I wonder if you might talk about how you see the role of healthcare in this intersection of MAHA, MAGA, moving forward to break down this class barrier, because
Absolutely.
healthcare ends up being one of those the biggest hurdles.
So when I was reporting my book, Second Class, I was flying around the country. I interviewed hundreds of people. Working class people, meaning people who don't have a college degree, don't work in an industry that requires a college degree, work with their hands, and who are locked out of the American dream, the top 20%. Actually, some are not locked out of the American dream. Actually, very hard to admit, red America, you're much more likely to become a homeowner if you're working class just because of the price of housing. It's something that we don't like to talk about from blue states and cities. There was unbelievable consensus among the people I interviewed, and this was regardless of whether they were progressive or MAGA, whether they voted Democrat or Republican. Almost every single person had very similar worldview, very similar policy choices, preferences, what they would like. The top 2 policy issues that I heard, and this is regardless of whether somebody was a liberal or conservative, was we want much less immigration and much more access to healthcare. And when I was promoting the book, I was saying the first party that gets to that combination is going to have a ruling majority for 40 years. And I thought in my naivete when I was writing the book, obviously Democrats are going to be receptive to this because this was their platform. I mean, as recently as 2015, Bernie Sanders was saying, open borders, that's a Koch brothers proposal.
Nice impression, Batya.
Thank you. It's my only impression, so I have to whip it out whenever I can.
But wait, you said that they want more access to healthcare, but at the same time, right now we're giving a message or hearing a message that the healthcare system is so lousy. It's burdened us with just an enormous amount of chronic disease, and it's not working. So what is it? Is it you want more access to healthcare, or do you want a different healthcare system and let's start over?
I think, these are people who are very busy working. They don't have the time to sit there. They know that they feel that they can't afford high quality healthcare. They know that everyone in their community is unhealthy. They know that they are obese and they can't do anything about it. And they don't have the time and the energy and they know that their kids have ADHD and are diagnosed with a million things. And they have 3 kids and one of them is making it impossible for the other 2. So, honestly, I think if Trump had come up with Medicare for all, they would have supported that. MAGA would have supported that. And so to me, there's a sort of like a bittersweet thing to the Maha thing. Like Trump has a genius for understanding what the American electorate wants. And I think he did understand that people feel really plagued by healthcare issues. They feel really ignored. They feel like we're the richest country on earth. How is it that I can't afford high quality healthcare? How is it that these people are going bankrupt over healthcare? But I think that what he did was he slotted in RFK Jr. into that spot. And I understand why he did it. I'd rather he did that than nothing. But I just hope that this is not instead of, because we do have massive problems. But I mean, if you listen to how Trump talks now about insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, he sounds like a leftist. When he talks about war, he sounds like a leftist. When he talks about immigration and tariffs, he sounds like a New Deal Democrat. So we're used to thinking because the media has portrayed him as a far right extremist. But if you look at the actual policy and try to hear him the way that his followers hear him, he sounds like a person of the left. And I think that there is reason to hope that he will be in charge. I think in a lot of these relationships with, people who, I'm not a fan of Elon Musk. I think at the end of the day, Trump is going to rein them in because he has a very clear idea of what the mandate is.
Let me ask you something about the idea of MAHA and some of the platform coming from a more privileged, and RFK Jr.'s voice coming from a more privileged space. I mean, when I say that to some of the MAHA people that I've been in touch with, they kind of think that's a cop-out because it's like the idea that you can't kind of take on big things and solve something systemically and do preventative medicine because nobody has the time and people are too poor. That like, how do you get big things achieved? That we're a country of innovation and that should invest to solve big problems. What do you say to that?
So first of all, I think he can do amazing things. Right now, preventative care is not covered by the government, is my understanding. Like there are no medical codes to cover preventative health interventions. I mean, I know my mammogram every year is covered.
Maybe it like depends, right, Mark?
It depends on your healthcare insurance for sure.
But my understanding, I mean, I was talking to somebody about this at CPAC, so, take it with a grain of salt, but he's a doctor and he was explaining to me that a lot of that is not covered by Medicare. So meaning there's no codes for things that would make us much healthier if we did them in a preventative way. There's no reason that a rich person like RFK Jr. with the Kennedy name should not be able to say, starting tomorrow, we're creating codes to reimburse for preventative healthcare. Like that would be a genius thing he could do immediately. I hope he does do that. If you're listening, RFK Jr., like, please forgive me for everything I said. Just go do this. There's a lot of...
Please don't give us more codes. I mean, there are so many codes. I mean, the system is so complex. I mean, that's like a whole other thing. But, Medicare does cover preventative services like screenings, exam, lab tests, things like that. I mean,
that was one of the big accomplishments of Obamacare was preventative care.
I don't think right. When we say preventative care in the MAHA way, I think what they're talking about is like, regular meetings with a dietitian, a gym membership, and we have a ton of people who want to be successful entrepreneurs, who want to be, personal coaches. Like, why is there? We could easily say, hey, we're going to get a government subsidy for that, right? Like ways of intervening in people's lives to just make them healthier, not to prevent them from or to screen them for cancer. Mm-hmm. But to actually do what we all do, what upper middle class people all pay for, which is like, Whole Foods, like going to the gym, like.
Yeah. So that idea to me, comes across as more government intervention when the entire platform so far has been less. And a lot of the policies like cutting Medicaid, cutting backs, all of these different integral programs seem to be doing the opposite.
Right. So Donald Trump is definitely not going to cut Medicare. He's promised that many, many times. It's not on the table at all. And, luckily RFK Jr. is a liberal. So he's, it doesn't seem like the kind of person who'd be like invested in that. He's not some guy who's like a deficit hawk. Trump is not a deficit hawk. He doesn't think the deficit is real. He doesn't think the debt ceiling is real. So I'm not very worried about that. I know Elon Musk is doing a big performative thing of firing government workers. These are desk jobs, right? That's not to say that we shouldn't be investing in other things.
I don't mean to interject. It's just, I think that it's important to note that they're not just desk jobs. These are people who were serving the American people for a long time. And many of them were friends and colleagues that were let go for performance issues that weren't real. And so that is
I think you'll have me back in 2 months and you can ask me about this. I think a lot of those people will be restored. I think what we're seeing right now is a very aggressive audit. And I think I mean, it's clear already, like, Marco Rubio is trying to get, he gave the green light, and the White House gave the green light for certain AIDS treatments to be shipped to, or the aid for AIDS treatments to be shipped to Africa. And then two 19-year-olds on Elon's team just basically axed the payment. Like, that's not going to stand.
Yep.
That's not a long-term like situation. I think Trump is waiting for Elon to get sick of this and move on. But the idea that there aren't things that are worth investing in is not a contradiction with the idea that we're paying a lot of things for a lot of things that are not worthy of being invested in.
Right.
Trump has
I think there's a little confusion about, cutting Medicare versus Medicaid. And,
Right.
back to this idea,
sorry.
nobody's really talking about cutting Medicare. I mean, I think it's really about cutting Medicaid, right? So these people that presumably many of you whom you met when you were out on your tour, working class, who don't have high incomes, many of those probably qualify for Medicaid. And the idea
Actually,
is
they
that
don't. So the problem is the poor in this country, actually, you can get, if you do not work, you can get up to $45,000 a year in benefits. So there's a thing called the benefits cliff, where let's say
Right.
you have a woman, right? And she's, a great worker. She shows up on time, which is very hard these days. She's a great worker, takes it seriously. She's working 35 hours a week. And her boss says to her, hey, you're a great worker. Let's get you on full time. I'll get you some benefits. Like, this will be great. You'll be on salary. You'll make more
Yeah.
money. If she takes a $2 an hour raise, she can
Right.
lose up to $45,000 in benefits. And the worst part of it is on the healthcare front. So she would be on Medicaid on 35 hours a week. The
Right.
minute she goes up to 40, she loses it. And let's say she has a disabled child. She cannot know ahead of time if the new insurance will cover the things her child needs. It's like the dumbest thing in the world. Everything is set up to penalize good behavior and to penalize strengths. People want to work. They want to work. But
Yeah,
the
I think
whole
you're talking
system
about
is
the
set up to-
ideology of, there's a lot of controversy about that, right? Like we're pushing people down into a way that they have to, stay under a certain number of hours to qualify for Medicaid. But if we're bringing it back to health, and we're talking about addressing chronic disease and making America healthy again, a lot of these people that are on Medicaid don't have the resources to do many of these things. And the Medicaid is the only way to access doctors. And right now there is talk of cutting Medicaid.
They're not
How
gonna
does
cut
that?
Medicaid. They're not going to cut Medicaid. That's not going to happen. You can have me back on and make fun of me in 2 months if they
No,
do.
no,
but
no.
No.
There's,
That's
there's no
not
way
our
they're not going to
style.
cut Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid. It's
But yeah,
But
I
they
mean,
have
they're
proposed
staring
lowering
they're staring
federal.
it down.
Yeah, they are. They're at least talking about it, and maybe
Oh.
they're not going to, and maybe it's
do
just
you
posturing.
do you think there's zero fraud in Medicaid? Or like what would you say is the percent you think there is? Because the people I interviewed for my book they all knew people who were scamming the system. This is why I say they're not on
it's
Medicaid.
not about fraud. Of course, there's
No, so but
abuse.
so if there's gonna be like I'm sure you have no problem with them addressing fraud, cutting when it comes to like fraud,
Sure.
right? Like that's so we
But
would agree on
I don't think
that.
anybody thinks they're going to make up. I mean, look, Trump has very ambitious goals. He wants to make permanent his tax cut. He wants to tackle the border. Invest more in the military. There's things that America elected him to do, and he is now looking for a way to have Congress offset the costs to do those things. My question to you is, do you think Trump really cares, and cares is probably the wrong word. He probably cares about America's health, obviously. I would think you'd think that. Does he put it as a priority? Does he want to put his shoulder into that when he has all these other things that he feels he has to do? Like, is MAGA behind MAHA? Because some of MAHA is going to be about more regulation on farmers, on big food industries. It's going to dictate what our kids eat in school. Those meals are going to be more nutritious, a la Michelle Obama's plan. Like, is MAGA really, as Trump as a leader of MAGA, are they really behind MAHA? I mean, where do you see that, or do you see tension, or do you see no tension?
I wouldn't say I've seen much tension. It's not a top priority for Trump. He cares about getting out of wars and he wants an amazing economy and a kind of like return to socially moderate policy. Those are the three things that sort of, if you think about the Republican Party under Reagan, and it had three main planks, right? It was socially conservative, it was very supportive of American exceptionalism, foreign interventions, right? And then it was free market. And Trump sort of took an axe to all three of those. He says, I'm not a conservative, I'm not pro-life. He believes in abortion up to 12 weeks. I'm pro-gay, supports gay marriage. He appointed Scott Bessent, the highest ranking out gay person in American history. Socially moderate, not socially conservative. He's not a free market person. He's a protectionist. So he wants massive tariffs and a closed border, limit the supply of labor. And then he doesn't believe in war. He doesn't believe that we belong in these interventions. So peace through strength, the kind of isolationism light, I call it, because it's not really isolationist. He has certain allies that he thinks bring a lot to the table for us that he's willing to do a lot for.
But the MAHA, is MAHA?
So MAHA's not, as you
should
notice,
they trust MAGA? Or
MAHA's not in
MAHA's
that.
not on that list, right?
Is not on that list. I think I think RFK Jr. made him, an offer he couldn't refuse. I think he felt that would be great for the movement to have a diversity of voices, to have a liberal in the mix, somebody who brought a constituency with him of people who care about that stuff. But this is not a top priority, I would say. I think that Trump feels he's a bit of a trophy, like, look, I got myself a Kennedy, right? Yeah. Like he kind of like the way he had his trophies at the inauguration. Look, here are my, the Silicon Valley's on its knees to me, right? Like he likes that. But I wouldn't say this is like a top priority. Of course, he wants Americans to be healthy, but like he would not support, I cannot imagine him supporting RFK Jr. doing anything in terms of like vaccines. I think what Trump would support is like, more investigations or whatever whatever RFK Jr. is like when he tries to
Studies
lie
don't
that
cost
he's
money.
anti-vax.
Yeah, right.
Like how he phrases
so
it.
Wait, that's a really interesting point, Batya, and I want to kind of press you on that because like right now the fear amongst a lot of folks in public health and a lot of folks who sort of believe in vaccines is that RFK Jr. is going to figure out a way to really erode trust in vaccines. And what do you say to that? Do you think when rubber meets the road, things aren't really going to change that much, or is this something that you're like he could try to do something here?
Or like in a weird way, is Trump the ally that public health actually needs right now to thwart RFK?
I think you're right about that. So on the left, because we all have many, many credentials, like, we really respect the views of experts. This is very absent from MAGA. There is not that same. People respect their lived experience. They respect their elders. They respect their community. They respect their kids, and kids respect their parents. Like there's a very different relationship with information. In fact, people are actually ironically much better at critical thinking. Like they're not going to just trust somebody because they're on TV saying it, especially when it comes to their health. And I'm an Orthodox Jew. I see this in my community as well. Like, the relationship that people have with expertise is very different on the right and on the left. And so RFK Jr. saying vaccines cause autism is not going to cause a gazillion working class people to not get the measles vaccine. Most people are very, very skeptical at this point of the COVID vaccine, especially because of the clause letting the companies out of liability. But they're not anti-vax. They draw a very sharp distinction between the COVID vaccines and the ways in which, especially the mandates, like all of the ickiness around them, and then just what their doctor is telling them their child needs and what everybody in their family got. So I don't think, obviously the crunchies are out there not vaccinating their kids for measles, right? We're seeing that right now. That's always going to be there. But I don't see that sort of, becoming some sort of like, snowball through the MAGA movement. Like these are very commonsensical people. They're like Trump. Like they don't like abortion bans and they have gay friends, even though they are conservatives and go to church and vote for Donald Trump. Like they're much more like in the center than people imagine.
But if he uses his charisma to start reopening safety questions and things like that, it's human nature. You will be influenced if suddenly the messaging out there is, you know what, we're not so sure about the safety of vaccines. You know what, we're not so sure that you need the hepatitis B vaccine so early. We're not so sure of all of these things. It does start to erode trust. And he does it in an authoritarian kind of way. And the argument is that it pushes people away because you've now lost that opportunity to engage with them if you've really broken that like circle of trust.
Well, let me follow up before you say anything, Batya, because there are increasingly there's some data showing that that Republicans are growing increasingly more skeptical of vaccinations. That this was a party that, for the most part, about 24 years ago, was pretty supportive of vaccinations. It slowly started to erode. The pandemic happened, and it just came crashing down. And now only a quarter of Republicans believe that childhood vaccinations are extremely important. So we are seeing that there is this erosion in trust, and I guess it's interesting that you say that you don't think that will really ultimately amount to kind of a wide scale MAGA fueled anti-vax movement. But my question for you is, like, there clearly is something happening to make Republicans mistrustful of vaccines in this country. What is a way to get at that community? And what is a way that either public health or media or whoever can approach a community that's becoming increasingly mistrustful of vaccines?
Well, the problem is that in many ways, over the course of the COVID pandemic, the medical community earned their distrust. That's how they see it, by telling them things that turned out not to be true and censoring alternative viewpoints and pushing, a very specific narrative. And then it would turn out that even when they were saying it, they didn't believe it. Of course, I'm sure you guys are all familiar with all the examples of this, but, there's a lot of earned distrust of expertise. And the way that it was earned was by disrespecting the intelligence of average people. Like Mark, you said, well, just by his charisma, they would get convinced by that. I don't imagine you think you would be convinced by anybody's charisma on, certainly not a medical issue. Okay, you're in the field, but I imagine you don't think you'd be convinced by people's charisma in any area. And so it's like we
Oh, really?
treat
I think I
people.
would, right? We're
Really?
susceptible to that, right?
Give me an
you give me
I
example
would say
of
that's how
something.
all cults work, and not to call it a cult, but like charismatic people draw you in, and it does not matter your background for you to end up in a cult. And it's that type of personality that can say things with such fervor that it's true. And if they've said things that align with you, it pulls you in. And by the time you're in, it's hard to get out, because then you'd be leaving your friends, your family. Like it becomes this.
Has that ever happened to you?
Yes.
Oh, we're learning.
Well, I've not been in a cult, but there are strong personalities that we all interact with.
But Batya, you're saying
seeing...
like this kind of stuff is the luxury of people with money and time and laptops. This is not the working class folks that of the heart and soul of MAGA. They don't have time to go online and research vaccine messaging, right? I mean, is that your point, that this
But
is
it's weird, because in a way, like, it's been my experience that they are much better at critical thinking than people who are educated and have like multiple degrees, who have become very kind of submissive to credentialism. Like, you see the list of credentials after someone's name. Oh, ipso facto, I must listen to what they're saying. They're probably right. They've probably done the work. Whereas working class people are like, no, they probably haven't done the work. They're probably trying to get something out of me. They're probably lying to me. And that would apply to RFK Jr. as well. I would say, like, the way, if you want to appeal to these people, you just have to respect them. Like, it's like the most obvious thing. Like, if you want to convince somebody, hear them out. Like, listen to what they're saying. The earned disrespect was earned. Like, people forced people to die alone over a lie. They forced 2-year-olds to wear cloth masks. Like, they forced disabled children to stay home so that their parents had to watch as these victories that they had worked so hard for, that the child can dress themselves and feed themselves and then go to school, they regressed and regressed and regressed and lost the ability to speak. Like, can you imagine what that's like? That person deserves an answer. Like, they deserve somebody to say, we fucked up And we're not going to do it again. And no one has done that. And I think that that is where the crisis in confidence comes from. All of the people who were in charge and in positions of authority just got away with it. It's one thing if you're wrong and then you say, I'm sorry, we were doing our best and we were wrong, but that didn't happen. And so now they think every time you talk, we're back there,
Right.
Like
and what can that look like, Batya? Like, what can that public accountability that you think people are seeking look like?
It looks like, first of all, I think respecting a parent's right to be the authority over what happens with their child. Now, I obviously support vaccinations. I don't think, we have to have herd immunity to measles. Children will literally die, right? Okay, you don't want to give it there. Give it somewhere else. Maybe the parent can be the authority on when their child finds out, about gay people. How about that? Like, there are a lot of things where people won't die if you can respect a parent's right to, instead of saying, no, we are the experts, we know what's best for your child. You don't. Like, human civilization is built on the idea that a parent's love for their child is irreplaceable. I'm not talking about abuse, obviously, like there's limits, obviously. There are so many ways that you can convey to people, we respect you. We're not going to call you racist for importing 20 million people to work in your industry. Like,
I think
so
what's
many ways to do
happened,
it.
yeah, I think it's really interesting you said that about measles, because what's happening now, and we talked a little bit about this, Mark, you took us through the medical freedom movement, that it's now gone the other way. Like, it's swung so extreme in terms of the individual liberty to decide exactly what you want, that you're starting to see that erosion in, again, what used to be just routine immunizations for children, where it used to be that in order to go to a public school, you would need to get this many vaccines. And now that number is really coming down. And so I think it's really, like, you're right. I'm with you on those public accountability spaces. I think there need to be, we never really had a national reckoning with COVID. I think there's a lot of built up resentment. I would love to see what that could look like. There has to be some meeting halfway, that if every sort of collective action now goes away in favor of like the parental right to decide what's good for their kid, there will be a lot more sickness in our society.
No, I'm not saying everything. Like, obviously, like, there has to be, but the experts need to earn the trust of the American people back. And what I would ask you all to do is, I don't know if any of you are Christian. I imagine nobody here is a Christian, but just imagine if
I am.
Oh, okay.
And
I was
so
gonna
is
use that as an
Tom and
example.
Mark. Yeah.
And say, like, because I think this is a really good way to help liberals understand the horror people have of being told what to put in their child's bodies. It's like, imagine if, like, you found out that your kid was being told, to thank Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, every day before they had their lunch. Like, for most Democrats or liberals, like, that would be a very upsetting idea. Like, how dare you impose this alien thing on my child? This is not what I sent them here for. And, people feel like, let's just take a minute and imagine that feeling. Like, that's how they feel about this. Okay, they're wrong about this. And let's say the people who are against the measles vaccine, but we owe it to our fellow Americans to convince them of that fact. It's true. It'll be easy to convince them of that. And I do think, Tom, that Donald Trump will be an ally in this. If he starts to see measles spreading, he's going to really put down his foot on this. He is a very commonsensical person at the end of the day. He's not ideological at all.
I think that the whole point of our podcast is, why should I trust you, based on this breakdown of trust from,
Yeah.
so it's not a topic that it's foreign to us.
Right.
I mean, I think what we're trying to think about is, how do you move forward? And, yes, like, we're not here to litigate whether or not there were failures in the public health response to the pandemic. I mean, that's the reason the five of us are here. I mean, it did expose weaknesses in our healthcare system. And I mean, whose fault is that, right? Leaders that, designed the system, yes. And there were problems with public health messaging. We've talked about that in some of our episodes. But I think it's really dangerous to label everything as, a complete failure. I really think if we're honest about moving forward, it's really, how do we learn from the challenges that we faced? You mentioned, we locked people up. Those were desperate times. I mean, this was a pandemic that rocked our world, and we need to improve communication and have better strength. And I think the question everybody's asking is, the likes of RFK, can Trump do this? I mean, that's where we really want to move forward. And I think that Evan Barker really hit it super well, because she is somebody who is raising her hand and saying, I have a chronic illness. And her chronic illness is nothing like anybody else is facing. I mean, quite frankly, the article that she wrote, she talks about a really rare, tragic genetic disease. And this idea that, make America healthy again by getting rid of pesticides and removing the red dye and no more seed oils, none of that is going to help her. She is looking for real, meaningful solutions that is going to help her genetic disease. And the only way that's going to happen is by intense research from experts who do have credentials. She has a genetic disease. It's not going away.
And also access to affordable healthcare coverage, which, Batya, I liked when I heard you say, in the end of the day, MAGA, this Congress, this president, as you see it, is not going to cut Medicaid. I mean, there's a ton of the MAGA community that lives on that line, even taking in effect the cliff you described, where people earn a little bit more, work a little bit more hours, and then suddenly lose access to Medicaid. There's still millions of the MAGA community who depend on Medicaid. It's a popular program. The idea that MAHA is going to go along with cutting Medicaid, or MAGA is going to go along with cutting Medicaid, just seems absurd. It's going to send us, in terms of health, send us way backwards. So I was relieved when your analysis was that it's just not going to happen. They're going to find the money elsewhere. But my question to you is, as you've described it, Trump has a lot of big priorities. MAHA, a lot of them Democrats, voted for Trump. They took a leap of faith to trust Trump that he was going to forward their agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Were they wrong to trust? And if yes, let's just rip the Band-Aid off if you feel that. What is your message to them?
Man, Tom, that's like you're putting me on the spot there.
That's
I
right.
don't often get questions that I would rather not answer. No, I'm just kidding. It's a really good question. I think that they're going to get, I think they will take the dye out of the food, I think that there will be symbolic, it's patronage, right? It's a patronage system. Politics is patronage. So they're going to get something for their votes. Are they going to get everything? No. Is Trump going to be an anti-vax president? No. Is he going to allow RFK Jr. to run rampant? No. Please God. I mean, that's my analysis. I hope I'm right. But I think that what they felt when they were welcomed into this movement was fellow travelers who are also fed up of being disrespected by the elites who have gotten made a big profit off of that disrespect. And I think that there's a lot of the people, if MAHA was their gateway into MAGA, they're finding that there are other MAGA values that they like. And honestly, if they could find their way to God or find their way to another community, that would be great too. Maybe the MAHA stuff would be, less pressing. So it's an interesting time. I don't know. I would say that they threw their vote away, but I don't think, and I really hope they're not going to get everything they want.
Right. No, look, Batya, this has been such an interesting conversation because part of the reason why, we did this podcast, per Mark's, what Mark was saying is it's just really great when we have someone who really kind of challenges our priors, our sort of way of thinking about things, but also taking this particular topic of the sort of compatibility of these two movements isn't something that, is taken on all that often. So I just want to thank you so much, Batya Ungar-Sargon. She's the author of Second Class, How the Elites Betrayed America's Working Men and Women. We want to thank her. I'm Brenda. He's Mark. He's Tom. She's Dr. Maggie Bartlett. And we would love for you to give us a rate, a like, a subscribe, a review, send us questions at whyshouldItrustyou.net, and we will see you right back here next week.